What would you do if the most dangerous-looking man you've ever seen walked into a gas station and seconds later, the police surrounded him like he was a criminal? This is exactly what happened on a cold, silent night, when a tattooed biker pulled into a small gas station, not knowing his life was about to change in front of dozens of strangers. At first glance, he looked like trouble. Dark tattoos covering his arms, a rough beard, a heavy leather jacket, and eyes that didn't show fear. People stepped back. Some whispered. Others started recording. Because in their minds, this man wasn't safe. And then, police cars came out of nowhere. Lights flashing. Tires screeching. Officers shouting. Hands up. In seconds, the situation turned intense. The biker didn't run. He didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He just slowly raised his hands and stayed calm. And that's when things got even stranger. Because the more the officers questioned him, the more confusing it became. He didn't act like a criminal. He didn't speak like someone hiding something. And most importantly, he wasn't afraid. But still, everyone watching had already made up their minds. That guy is dangerous. That guy is guilty. That guy must have done something bad. And maybe you would have thought the same thing too. Until one moment changed everything. One small detail. One ID card. One truth. That left the officers speechless. That made the crowd go completely silent. That turned fear into shock. Because the man they had surrounded, the man they judged in seconds, was hiding a secret so powerful, it would make everyone question their own thinking. Who was he really? Why did he look like a criminal but act like a hero? And what truth was hidden behind those tattoos? Stay with me because by the end of the story, you'll realize something that most people learn too late. Not everything is what it seems. And sometimes, the person you fear the most is actually the one risking everything to protect you. The sound of screeching tires shattered the quiet night. It was one of those nights where everything felt still, too still. The kind of silence that makes even the smallest noise feel loud. A lonely gas station sat on the edge of a quiet highway, its flickering fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. Moths circled the glow, occasionally tapping against the glass, while the distant hum of the road echoed through the darkness. Inside, the cashier leaned lazily against the counter, scrolling through his phone, half asleep and counting down the hours until morning. Outside, a single car was parked near pump number 3, its driver absent. The wind gently pushed a loose piece of paper across the concrete, scraping softly as it moved. And then, a deep, thunderous roar broke through the silence. It wasn't just loud. It was commanding. A motorcycle engine. Heads turned instantly. The cashier looked up from his phone. The man inside the parked car straightened in his seat. Even the air itself seemed to tense. The motorcycle rolled into the gas station slowly, its engine growling like a warning. The rider didn't rush. He moved with control, calm, steady, deliberate. The headlights cut through the darkness as he approached the pump, then shut off with a low mechanical click. For a moment, everything went quiet again. The biker swung his leg off the seat and stood up. And that's when people really started to notice him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a worn black leather jacket that had clearly seen years of road and weather. His boots were heavy, leaving solid thuds against the concrete as he walked. But it wasn't just his build or his clothes that caught attention. It was his tattoos. They covered his arms completely, crawling up past his neck and disappearing beneath his collar. Dark ink, bold lines, symbols that looked intense, almost aggressive. Some were faded, others sharp and fresh, layered over each other like pieces of a long, complicated story. From a distance, it didn't look like art. It looked like a warning. The cashier's grip tightened slightly on the counter. He instinctively glanced toward the security monitor, zooming in on the biker outside. "Who is this guy?" he muttered under his breath. The biker didn't seem to notice the attention. Or maybe he did, and simply didn't care. He walked toward the pump, his movements slow but confident. No hesitation. No nervousness. Just a quiet presence that somehow felt heavy. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and began fueling his bike. Simple. Normal. But the tension didn't go away. If anything, it grew. A car pulled into the station, slowing as it passed him. The driver stared, then stared longer than necessary. Something about the biker made people uncomfortable, like their instincts were telling them to be cautious. And then, everything escalated. Out of nowhere, flashing red and blue lights lit up the night. Two police cruisers sped into the gas station, tires screeching as they came to a sudden stop behind the motorcycle. The lights reflected off the chrome, the windows, the ground, turning the quiet scene into chaos in seconds. The biker froze. The cashier's eyes widened. What the? Car doors slammed open. Hands where we can see them, a loud voice shouted. The command cut through the air like a blade. The biker slowly turned his head, then raised his hands without a word. No resistance. No sudden moves. Just calm compliance. The officers stepped out quickly, their movements sharp and practiced. One moved to the left, the other to the right, creating distance while keeping him surrounded. Their hands hovered near their weapons, eyes locked onto the biker's every movement. Do not move, the second officer warned. The biker stood still, completely still. From inside the gas station, the cashier backed away slightly, his heart racing. He quickly locked the door with a click, peering through the glass with growing anxiety. Outside, the man who had been sitting in his car pulled out his phone and started recording. Within moments, the quiet station had turned into a scene. What's going on? Someone whispered from a distance. Looks like they caught someone. That guy? Yeah, he looks dangerous. The whispers spread fast. All eyes were now on the biker. But he didn't react. Didn't argue. Didn't panic. He simply stood there, hands raised, his face calm, almost unreadable. One officer approached cautiously. Step away from the motorcycle. Slowly. The biker obeyed immediately, taking a step back. Turn around. He did. Every movement controlled. Careful. Predictable. And yet something about him didn't match the situation. Most people in this position would be nervous, defensive, angry. But not him. There was no fear in his posture. No tension in his voice. Just quiet patience. The officer studying him narrowed his eyes, clearly trying to read him. Sir, he said firmly, we received a report about a suspicious individual matching your description in the area. The biker didn't respond right away. Then finally, in a low, steady voice, he said, I understand. That was it. No excuses. No questions. Just those two words. The officers exchanged a quick glance. Something felt off. Not wrong. Just unexpected. The flashing lights continued to pulse across the scene, painting everything in red and blue. The air felt heavier now, charged with uncertainty. And standing at the center of it all was a man everyone had already judged, before knowing a single thing about him. And somehow, the night was only just beginning. The flashing lights continued to pulse, casting long, shifting shadows across the gas station. What had started as a quiet stop was now a tense, watchful scene. Every movement felt magnified. Every second stretched longer than it should. The biker stood still, his back now turned to the officers, hands still raised in the air. The engine of his motorcycle ticked softly as it cooled down, breaking the silence in small, rhythmic sounds. One officer stepped closer, cautious, but controlled. Keep your hands up, he said firmly. The biker didn't respond verbally this time. He didn't need to. His stillness said enough. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't challenging them. He was simply cooperating. But cooperation didn't erase suspicion. Not tonight. The second officer circled around, his eyes scanning every detail, the leather jacket, the heavy boots, the gloves, and most of all, the tattoos. Up close, they looked even more intense. Dark ink wrapped around the biker's arms in thick patterns. Some symbols were sharp and geometric. Others looked like words, possibly names, though they were partially hidden beneath layers of ink. A large design stretched from his wrist up toward his elbow, bold and impossible to ignore. The officer's jaw tightened slightly. Yeah, definitely looks like gang ink, he muttered under his breath. The first officer nodded subtly, not taking his eyes off the biker. Will confirm. From across the lot, more people had gathered, but they kept their distance. No one wanted to get too close. A couple stood near their car, whispering quietly. Another man leaned against a pump, his phone raised, recording everything. This is crazy. He doesn't even look surprised. Of course not. Guys like him are used to this. The assumptions spread quickly. Quiet judgments formed just as fast. Inside the gas station, the cashier watched through the glass, his face tense. He kept glancing at the locked door, then back at the biker. His earlier uneasiness had turned into full suspicion now. Something's not right about that guy, he said to himself. Outside, the first officer spoke again. Where are you coming from? The biker answered calmly, his voice steady and low. Just riding through. Where exactly? From the south. Heading north. Short answers. Simple. But to the officers, they weren't enough. Do you have any weapons on you? The second officer asked.
No.
Anything illegal we should know about?
No.
The officer paused, studying him carefully. The biker's tone didn't change. No hesitation. No defensiveness. But still, something felt incomplete. Step forward slowly, the first officer instructed. The biker took one step forward. Stop. He stopped immediately. The officer moved in closer now, standing just a few feet behind him. From this distance, the tattoos were even clearer and even more intimidating. Some looked like coded symbols. Others appeared to have been intentionally layered, as if hiding older designs beneath newer ones. The officer frowned. Lift your sleeves. The biker hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then slowly rolled up his sleeves further. More ink, more detail, more mystery. The second officer stepped in beside his partner, both now examining the tattoos closely. Seen markings like this before, he said quietly. Not common, but not clean either. Yeah, the first officer replied. Could be affiliated. The word hung in the air. Affiliated. It changed the entire tone of the situation. From routine check to something more serious. The crowd seemed to sense it too. The whispers grew louder. I knew it. He's definitely involved in something. Look at those tattoos. No normal person has that. Phones stayed raised, capturing every second. Some people leaned in slightly, trying to get a better look, while still keeping a safe distance. The biker remained silent, still facing away, still with his hands raised, still calm. And that calmness was starting to bother the officers more than anything else. Turn around, the first officer said. Slowly, the biker turned to face them. For the first time, they got a clear look at his face. It wasn't what they expected. There was no anger there, no aggression, just a quiet, steady expression. Focused, controlled, almost tired. His eyes met theirs, but not in a challenging way. In a knowing way, like he had been in this situation before. ID, the second officer said, holding out his hand. The biker gave a small nod. It's in my right pocket. Move slowly.
He did.
Every motion deliberate. Careful. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over his identification. The officer took it quickly and stepped back. For a moment, everything paused. Even the whispers faded slightly. The officer looked down at the ID. At first, his expression stayed firm. Professional. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked closer. His grip on the card tightened. Wait. The words slipped out quietly. The second officer noticed immediately. What is it? The first officer didn't answer right away. He looked at the ID again, then back at the biker, then again at the ID. Something didn't match what he expected. Something was off. Or maybe something was about to change everything. The second officer stepped closer. Let me see. The first officer handed it over slowly, his eyes still fixed on the biker. The second officer glanced at it casually at first, then froze. His expression shifted instantly. Confusion.
Surprise.
And then, something deeper. The air around them changed. The tension didn't disappear, but it transformed. Because, in that moment, the story they thought they understood was no longer the same. And the man they had judged so quickly was not who they thought he was at all. The second officer stared at the ID for a long moment, as if trying to process what he was seeing. His eyes moved across the card once, then again, slower this time. The confidence he had just moments ago began to fade, replaced by something far less certain. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. The first officer stepped closer. "What is it?" Instead of answering, the second officer turned the ID toward him. "Look." The first officer took it back, his brows tightening. He read the name carefully, then the designation beneath it. His eyes widened slightly. "No way." He looked up at the biker again, but this time, it wasn't suspicion in his gaze. It was confusion, and something close to disbelief. The biker stood there calmly, his hands now slowly lowering to his sides, though he made no sudden movement. He watched them quietly, almost as if he had expected this exact reaction. "Sir," the first officer said, his voice no longer as sharp as before, "can you confirm this identification?" The biker gave a small nod. "Yes." The simplicity of his answer only made it more real. The second officer let out a slow breath, running a hand over his head. "We need to verify this," he said under his breath. The first officer nodded quickly, already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We need immediate verification on an ID," he said, his tone now more controlled, but edged with urgency. He read out the details carefully, making sure not to miss a single word. There was a pause. The kind of pause that feels longer than it actually is. The flashing lights continued to paint the scene in red and blue. The crowd stood frozen, watching every second unfold. Even the cashier had pressed closer to the glass, his earlier fear now mixed with curiosity. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Why are they acting like that?" The officers didn't respond. They were too focused on what came next. A crackle came through the radio. "Unit 12, please confirm the name again." The officer repeated it. Another pause. Then, "Unit 12, stand by." The silence that followed felt heavy. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest. The first officer swallowed slightly, his grip tightening on the radio. The second officer kept his eyes locked on the biker, but his posture had changed. He was no longer circling, no longer analyzing. He was waiting. Finally, the radio came back to life. "Unit 12, that identification is confirmed." The officer's breath caught. "Repeat," he said quickly. "Confirmed. Individual is listed under federal operations. Clearance level restricted. You are advised to disengage and do not interfere. I repeat, do not interfere." For a moment, neither officer spoke. The words hung in the air, echoing louder than the sirens. "Do not interfere." Everything shifted in that instant. The first officer slowly lowered his radio, his face now completely different from before. The suspicion was gone, replaced by realization. The second officer exhaled deeply, stepping back almost instinctively. "Sir," he said, his voice quieter now, more respectful. "We didn't know." The biker gave a small, understanding nod. "I figured." The first officer took a step back as well, putting space between them, not out of caution anymore, but out of respect. "Are you currently on assignment?" he asked carefully. The biker didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. The silence itself was enough. The officers understood. And just like that, the entire situation flipped. The man they had surrounded, the man they had suspected, the man the crowd had judged in seconds, wasn't a threat. He was something else entirely. Something far more serious. The second officer glanced again at the tattoos, his perspective now completely changed. What once looked like aggressive markings now felt deliberate, purposeful, not chaos,
but design.
"Those tattoos," he said slowly, "they're part of it, aren't they?" The biker looked down briefly at his arms, then back up. "Every one of them," he said. The officer nodded, understanding beginning to settle in. "Cover identity." "More than that," the biker replied. "They're how I got in." A quiet silence followed. The weight of his words sank in. He wasn't just pretending to be part of something dangerous. He had lived it, walked inside it, surrounded himself with people who wouldn't hesitate to turn on him if they ever found out the truth. The first officer shook his head slightly, almost in disbelief. "That's risky." The biker gave a faint, almost tired smile. "That's the job." Across the lot, the crowd had gone completely silent now. Phones were still raised, but no one was whispering anymore.
The mood had changed.
Confusion had turned into shock. Judgment had turned into realization. The cashier slowly unlocked the door, stepping outside just a little, trying to hear what was being said. "Wait, he's not a criminal?" someone asked quietly. "No," another voice replied. "I think he's something else." Back near the motorcycle, the first officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we apologize for the misunderstanding," he said sincerely. "We were responding to a call, and—" "You did your job," the biker interrupted calmly. There was no anger in his voice. No frustration. Just acceptance. The second officer nodded. "Still, we should've." "You acted on what you saw," the biker said. "That's how this works." The honesty in his words made it harder to respond. Because he was right. They had acted on what they saw. And what they saw was only the surface. The first officer handed back the ID carefully, almost respectfully this time. "Thank you," the biker said, slipping it back into his pocket. Another brief silence settled over them. But this one felt different. Less tense. More reflective. The officer stepped aside, creating a clear path. No commands. No pressure. Just space. And as the biker turned slightly toward his motorcycle, the flashing lights continued to glow behind him. But now, they didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a reminder that sometimes the truth is hidden beneath layers no one takes the time to understand. And the man standing in front of them was never what he seemed to be. For a few seconds, no one moved. The flashing red and blue lights still painted the ground, the pumps, the faces of the small crowd. But the tension that once filled the air had completely shifted. What had started as fear had quietly turned into something else. Reflection. The two officers stood off to the side now, their posture no longer aggressive, no longer guarded. Their hands were away from their weapons. Their shoulders had relaxed. It was subtle, but anyone watching could feel the difference. Respect had replaced suspicion. The biker stood near his motorcycle, calm as ever. If anything, he looked exactly the same as when he first arrived. Same jacket. Same tattoos. Same quiet expression. But now, everyone saw him differently. The first officer took a small step forward, clearing his throat as if searching for the right words. "Sir," he began, his voice more measured now. "We really do appreciate what you're doing." The biker paused, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his motorcycle. He didn't turn fully. Just slightly enough to acknowledge the words. "It's part of the job," he said simply. The second officer shook his head. Still, not many people would take that kind of risk. The biker didn't respond immediately. For a brief moment, his gaze drifted past them, toward the dark highway stretching into the distance. Endless. Quiet. Unknown. "That's kind of the point," he said after a pause. "Most people shouldn't have to." There was something in his tone that hit differently. Not pride. Not arrogance. Just truth. A truth that carried weight. Behind them, the small crowd remained frozen in place. No one was whispering anymore. No one was judging. The same people who had looked at him with fear just minutes ago were now staring with a completely different expression. Curiosity, respect, and for some even a bit of guilt. The man who had been recording slowly lowered his phone, his face thoughtful. A woman near the pumps crossed her arms, shaking her head slightly. "I can't believe we all just assumed," she murmured. Another voice replied quietly, "We didn't know." But deep down, they all understood something uncomfortable. They hadn't wanted to know. They had seen the leather jacket, the tattoos, the bike, and they had already made up their minds. Back near the entrance, the cashier stepped outside cautiously, leaving the door slightly open behind him. His earlier fear had completely faded now, replaced by an almost awkward curiosity. He looked at the biker for a moment, then spoke. "Hey, he hesitated, unsure of how to address him. You want coffee or something? It's on the house." The offer hung in the air, simple but sincere. The biker glanced toward him, a faint smile forming for the first time. "Appreciate it," he said, "but I've got to keep moving." The cashier nodded quickly. Yeah, of course." There was a brief pause. Then the biker swung his leg back over the motorcycle in one smooth motion. The engine hadn't even fully cooled before he brought it back to life. The deep rumble returned, but this time, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt powerful, purposeful. The officers instinctively stepped back, giving him space without needing to be told. The first officer gave a small nod. "Stay safe out there." The biker looked at him for a moment. "You too." It was a simple exchange, but it carried meaning now. A mutual understanding. Two sides of the same fight, just playing different roles. As the biker adjusted his grip on the handlebars, his eyes moved briefly across the crowd. Not in anger, not in judgment, just observation. He had seen those looks before. The fear, the assumptions, the quick conclusions. But he didn't hold it against them. Because he knew something most people didn't. That the world isn't always what it looks like on the surface. That sometimes the people who appear the most dangerous are the ones standing between danger and everyone else. He revved the engine once. The sound echoed through the quiet night, cutting through the lingering silence. And then
He was gone.
the motorcycle sped out of the gas station, disappearing into the darkness of the highway within seconds. The red and blue lights faded as the officers turned off their sirens, leaving behind nothing but the soft hum of the night once again. But something had changed. The gas station didn't feel the same anymore. The crowd slowly began to disperse, each person walking away with their own thoughts. Some shook their heads. Others stayed quiet. A few glanced down at their phones, replaying the videos they had just recorded. But now, those videos meant something different. They weren't just clips of a police stop anymore. They were reminders. Reminders of how quickly people judge, how easily appearances can mislead, and how wrong first impressions can be. The cashier stood near the entrance for a while longer, staring out at the empty road where the biker had disappeared. He let out a slow breath, then quietly muttered to himself. Didn't see that coming. Neither did anyone else. Back near the cruisers, the two officers leaned against their cars, the tension of the night finally settling. The second officer looked down at the ground, then spoke. "You ever think about how often we get it wrong?" The first officer didn't answer right away. He watched the empty highway for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said. "More than we realize." Another pause. Then he added quietly, "But tonight, we learned something." The second officer glanced at him. "What's that?" The first officer exhaled slowly. That not every story is written on the surface. The words lingered in the air. And they were true. Because somewhere out there, riding through the darkness, was a man no one would ever fully understand. A man living between two worlds. One where he had to look like the danger, so he could fight it from the inside. And as the gas station lights flickered softly in the distance, one thing became clear to everyone who had been there. The most dangerous-looking person in the room isn't always the villain. Sometimes he's the reason everyone else makes it home safe.